The Novellae Constitutiones, or Justinian's novels, are now considered one of the four major units of Roman law initiated by Roman Emperor Justinian I in the course of his long reign. The other three pieces are the Codex Justinianus, the Digest, and the Institutes. Justinian's quaestor Tribonian was primarily responsible for compiling these last three. Together, the four parts are known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, whereas the Code, Digest, and Institutes were designed by Justinian as coherent works. The novels are diverse laws enacted after 534 that never were officially compiled during his reign. History. Justinian's first code, issued in 529, compiled and harmonized the imperial enactments of previous emperors. After the code was promulgated, only it, and not the prior imperial legislation, could be cited as law. However, in 530 and 531, Justinian issued the Quinquaginta Decisiones that resolved differences among the writings of classical jurists, and he continued to issue other new laws as well. This meant the code could no longer be the sole, unified source of imperial legislation. Hence, in 534 Justinian issued the Constitutia Cordi Nobis, creating a second edition of the code. This edition integrated his new legislation into the imperial enactments in the first edition and superseded it. Justinian continued to legislate after he created the second edition of the code. Thus, in his pragmatic sanction of 554, he foresaw that he would need to maintain the collection of these new constitutions modifying the code. This he did in the form of an archive called the Liber Legum or Libri Legum. Timeline. While Justinian never made an official manuscript compilation of the new laws, private persons filled this void by making unofficial collections in several forms. The following timeline provides a succinct description of these collections and explains how they were transmitted through the centuries. The EJ is a partially annotated Latin summary of the novels, most of which were officially issued in Greek. Because it is in Latin, the Epitome Juliani is the preferred source of the novels in the West in the early Middle Ages, until about 1100, when another version is discovered there. 556. A collection of 134 novels issued between 535 to 556 is compiled around this time, mostly a word-for-word, full-text translation of Greek novels. It also includes those few novels originally in Latin and the Latin versions of a few originally done in both Latin and Greek. When it is discovered in Bologna around 1100, it comes to be known as the Authenticum, because Irnerius and other glossators think it an official compilation made at Justinian's order. 575 to 580. A collection of 168 novels is created during the reign of Tiberius II Constantine. Two manuscripts of this compilation discovered in the Middle Ages, the Venetian and the Florentine, form the basis of print editions during the Renaissance that are referred to as the Greek collection of 168. 600 to 800 Giuliani Epitome manuscripts circulate in Europe. The EJ is the main source of Roman law there until the Authenticum surfaces. Other parts of what come to be known as Corpus Juris Civilis are little known in the West. 892. The Basilica is published during reign of Byzantine Emperor Leo VI the Wise. Based on the Greek collection of 168 novels, it includes extracts of many novels, along with parts of the Digest, Code, and Institutes, supplemented by scholia. The Basilica is used later to help reconstruct the novels. 12th century. The Authenticum appears in Bologna and largely replaces the Epitome Juliani. Justinian's Digest, Institutes, Code, and novels begin to be called Corpus Juris Civilis to differentiate them from the Corpus Juris Canonici. The CJC at that time is organized differently than today. Its units were each of the 3 volumes of the Digest, the first 9 books of the Code, and, together as a 5th volume, the Institutes. the last 3 volumes of the Code, and the novels in the form of the Authenticum. The latter was called Volumen, or Volumen Parvum. 13th century The Venetian manuscript, an early 16th century copy of this manuscript in the Vatican, is referred to as the Palatino Vaticanus. Of the 168 novel Greek collection is created around this time. Its last 3 laws are decrees of the Praetorian Prefect, 4 are novels of Justin II, and 2 are given twice. Also included, as an appendix, are 13 edicta, or edicts, some of which repeat novels in the main collection. 14th century The Florentine manuscript, also based on the 168 novel Greek collection, but of lesser quality, is drafted in the 14th century. 1476 The first print edition of novels is published in Rome with the Tres Libri of the Code and the Institutes. The novels are based on the Authenticum. 1531 Gregorius Holoander compiles the first book consisting only of the novels, as taken from the Bolognese copy of the Codex Laurentianus. 1558 Henry Scrimgeour creates an edition of the novels based on the Palatino Vaticanus copy of the Venetian manuscript. 1571 Antonius Contius constructs an influential edition of the novels using both the Authenticum and 168 novel Greek collection texts. 1834 A German translation of the novels, by Friars Leben and Schneider, is published as part of Karl Eduard Otto, Bruno Schilling and Carl Friedrich Sintenis's edition of the Corpus Juris Civilis. It is based mainly on the Greek collection but also uses the Authenticum, the Epitome Juliani, and the Basilica. 1840 Eduardo Bruggen's edition of the novels, based on both the Venetian and Florentine manuscripts of the Greek collection, is published in the Kriegel Brothers edition of the CJC. 1851 Gustav Ernst Heimbach publishes his critical edition of the Authenticum. 1873 A critical edition of the Epitome Juliani is issued by Gustav Hannel. 1881 Karl Eduard Zachariah von Lingenthal's critical edition of the novels re-establishes many of their subscriptions. 1895 The novels by Rudolf Skoel, based on Greek collection of 168, and supplemented by the other versions and critical studies, is issued as Volume 3 of Theodore Mommsen, Paul Kruger, Skoel, and Kroll's classic 3-volume Editio Stereotypa of the CJC. It includes the 13 edicts and an appendix of 9 other laws of Justinian found in various ancient manuscripts. 1932 Samuel Parsons Scott's English translation of the CJC is published. Unfortunately, Scott uses the Kriegel Brothers edition of the CJC rather than that of Mommsen, Kruger, Skoel and Kroll, and his translation is severely criticized. Moreover, he fails to translate the 13 edicts, which were included by Oss and Bruggen in the Kriegel edition, and ignores the additional laws presented in the appendix by Skoel and Kroll. 1943 Fred H. Bloom sends his English translation of Justinian's Code and novels to Clyde Farr. 2008 Bloomer's Code and novels published on annotated Justinian Code website. 2013 Selective English translation of Kroll's preface to the novels published by Miller and Curley.